Welcome back. Now, Vodacom and MTN are overcharging customers and exploiting the poor in South Africa. That's according to a preliminary report by the Competition Commission. Right to Know is urging South Africans to join the fight against high data prices. These findings show that data prices in the country compare poorly with those in other African countries. So we have the national organizer, Lazola Kati, who joins me now just to shed light in terms of these findings by the Competition Commission. Lazola, thanks a lot for joining us this afternoon. Looking at some of those findings by the Competition Commission, would you say that indeed you feel vindicated as Right to Know because you've been advocating for these data prices to fall by some of these networks?
Hi, Faith. Thank you so much for having me on the show. And in fact, yes, as the Right to Know, we do feel vindicated. But more than anything, we're very pleased with the recommendations that are on the preliminary report. One of them is that data prices should go down immediately. One of the things that we highlighted last year when we presented at the Competition Commission is that data prices in South Africa are the highest in the BRICS section of the countries, but also they're highly exclusionary to the majority of the country, which are your lower income households and your middle income households. For instance, in Tanzania, Vodacom charges 79 Rand 1 gig data. But in South Africa, South Africans are made to pay 149 Rand for 1 gig Vodacom data. That alone proves how overpricing and profiteering have really taken over the telecommunications sector.
Now, how then do you stop putting pressure on, especially as Right to Know, on, these networks to ensure that indeed you've got data prices fall? This has been a call that's been going on for years now. It's not necessarily a new call. So then how is it that you can possibly even put the pressure on? Because at the end of the day, even according to the report itself, the lower income groups are the ones that are suffering the most simply because of the data costs and the cost of actual airtime comparison with other countries. In other words, by the minimum that you buy, you're actually spending more money as opposed to buying from in bulk.
Yes, it's quite true, actually, Faith, because we did some research with the Link Research Center that's in Johannesburg, and one of the things that came out from all the lower-income households and middle-income households is that a lot of citizens in South Africa have to choose between bread and data, because we must remember that in this era, to apply for employment, you need to have data. You need to go onto the internet. So now people are choosing bread. They're choosing basic needs, but also sacrificing the basic need to be employed. And so what we've done as the Right to Know, as beginning from last year, we marched to Vodacom regional offices in KZN last year, basically demanding that they decrease their data costs and also asking the MTN regional office in KZN to have a roundtable and to have a meeting. Because the problem is that each of these networks, we've written letters to them. We've tried our best to contact them via telephone. We've marched to their offices. And the only thing we have received is that there's nothing they can do because the prices are that high. And so what we are now engaging and beginning to do is actually trying to engage eNCA as a regulatory body in terms of why are they allowing these network providers to charge South Africans such high rates, but in other African countries, these African countries are being charged lower rates. So we're trying to understand the criteria in which eNCA is using in South Africa. And if we find that this criteria is different in different African countries, then something big has to happen.
Lazola, I must ask you, do you feel like actual eNCA is effective in being able to implement some of those strategies? I'm hearing that you are approaching eNCA and you've asked eNCA to actually have these engagements alongside with the networks themselves. But in terms of the effectiveness of eNCA, for the mere fact that this report is even coming out of the Competition Commission, do you think that they're effective in being able to hold some of these networks to account, especially where consumers are at hand?
We are hoping as the Right to Know that the Competition Commission is the last stop and that the Competition Commission can hold your regulatory departments to account and also the Communications Department to account, because we've been speaking to the Department of Communications for years now since we started this campaign, and we are hoping that the buck stops with this inquiry and that this preliminary report is actually paving a way toward a final report that actually speaks justice to the lower income citizens of South Africa.
Do you buy the explanation the nation that perhaps it's an issue around the mobile spectrum that is actually impacting the costs of data. So the lack of mobile spectrum is the one that is actually hampering, or rather raising prices when it comes to data costs. So do you think that this is actually just simply an excuse, especially considering the fact that other countries like Kenya, like Tanzania, for example, are able to access data at a much lower cost?
Thank you, Faith. You make a very important point at the end there, is that it cannot be a conversation on spectrum or lack of spectrum, because currently we have been hearing that through the eNCA bill that the communications minister pulled back, that Vodacom and these service providers were trying to get more spectrum. So this doesn't mean that there's a lack of spectrum. This means that these companies, networks, are trying to forcefully get more spectrum so that they can continue to charge citizens higher. And we're looking at these other African countries that have the same exact, or relatively the same exact spectrum as South Africa has, but you find that their citizens are paying much lower than South Africa. So this isn't a conversation on spectrum. This is a conversation on profiteering.
Lazola, we're going to leave our conversation there for this afternoon, but thanks a lot for joining us. Speaking there to Lazola from Right to Know, just regarding the issue around that announcement by the Competition Commission of data, and how much is it that you as a consumer are paying towards data in comparison to other African countries.